Coming up on We Talk News this week, a federal judge says if you smoke weed, you are entitled to own a gun. The judge calls the government policy blocking gun ownership by weed users as concerning. He rules that it violates the constitutional rights to bear arms, whether they use cannabis or not. Weed giant Canopy Growth is cutting their job force and shutting down a grow facility in Ontario. Deborah Borchardt has that story. New York State is getting ready to require health insurance providers to reimburse medical marijuana patients. And California is looking for another state to partner on a plan to create interstate commerce for cannabis legally. MedMen is on fumes as their mismanagement could be close to shutting down their whole operation. All that on We Talk News with Alaina Pinto. Next.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to We Talk News. I'm Alaina Pinto. And even though you never heard President Biden mention the word cannabis or marijuana in his State of the Union address earlier this week, federal judges continue to hand down decisions that reflect the inconsistency with state law. In Oklahoma, a federal judge there says the government's practice of banning gun ownership for users of cannabis is unconstitutional. Yes, it's the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms that paved the way for Judge Patrick Wyrick to hand down his decision in a Western Oklahoma federal courthouse. The judge also said that the, quote, mere use of marijuana does not involve violent, forceful, or threatening conduct. The Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. is likely to appeal Judge Wyrick's ruling to a higher federal court. No pun intended on that one. Another state, though, attached to Oklahoma is Missouri, and that state opened up its adult use legal sales of cannabis this week. It was pretty popular since the Show Me State set records for an opening day weekend. Our Missouri correspondent, Brandon Jones, found a local business that is thriving now that all adults can buy legal weed.
What's up, everybody? It's Brandon Jones from B Green Distribution with Missouri Cannabis Report for We Talk News. And I'm here at Funky Skunk in... Where am I at? Raymore? Raytown. Shit, I keep forgetting Kansas City runs all together. So I'm here in Raytown with my buddy Rod and James here. Rod's one of the co-owners, and then James runs here and also does growing classes. They actually taught storing and curing today. What do you know? Boostman came for the storing and curing kit glass. But just wanted to talk about what you guys got going on here. It's a consumption lounge by membership.
Yeah, consumption lounge. Oh, my bad. Yeah,
You're
consumption lounge by membership, monthly and daily. And we always educating. We also do Missouri medical cards. We got a doctor on staff. So if anybody needs that, we also offer that. And then my guy James here.
I'm honestly just a member. I'm here daily, operating the dab bar, providing the information you need to make sure you liaison with the doctor, things of that nature. We also provide clones, access to seeds. If you don't have utensils at home to use all that new recreational that you're getting, come down here. We have plenty of different utensils that you can use while you're down here at the social lounge so that you can use your product however you want.
And you guys have apparel here, other stuff, just fun stuff, ancillary products and stuff like that to go along with, while you're here to be able to enjoy your cannabis. And it's a safe environment where people are like-minded can come here. And especially with, rec passing, have you guys seen any uptick or change or?
I've seen a lot more people smoking in parking lots lately. So stop smoking in parking lots. Come on over here to the Funky Skunk. Get your membership. Sit down here. Enjoy time with it. Matter of fact, I run deals all the time. If you can beat me on the Nintendo, you'll win something nice. I promise.
Yeah, Missouri sales were crazy over the weekend. Over 12 million, 8.5 from rec, and a little over 4.5 from the medical market. So still pretty big turnout from the medical market, just trying to support. Another reason to buy cannabis here in Missouri. We're all here to try to support. So again, thanks again for all you guys do, helping the community, educating, and having a safe place for all the people to consume here in Missouri. So if you get a chance, come down here, check out the Funky Skunk, see the classes that he teaches every week, right? Every Wednesday at 6:30, generally here at the Funky Skunk. So really appreciate you guys.
On all social media. We're at a Funky Skunk KC on Facebook, Instagram, and then also our website, Funky Skunk KC, that's with 2Ks.com.
All right, again, I'm Brandon Jones from B Green Distribution with Missouri Canner Support for Weed Talk News. Everybody stay educated and medicated. Have a great week.
Before we start our state-by-state roundup of cannabis news, let's check out what's going on with one of the largest Canadian cannabis companies, Canopy Growth, that is now laying off 60% of the workforce there. Another sign that the industry is shrinking. The Green Market Report's Deborah Borchardt has that story.
I'm Deborah Borchardt, and this is the business update for Weed Talk News from the Green Market Report. Canopy Growth reported slumping revenues on Thursday and signaled a new cost-cutting era that includes cutbacks on cultivation and 800 layoffs. Revenue fell by 28% to $101 million, and their net losses were $266 million. Their cash and short-term investments fell from $1.3 billion at the end of March to just $789 million at the end of December. The acquisition of New York medical cannabis operator Attain by Riv Capital is entering another messy chapter. Scott's Miracle-Gro, owner of the hydroponic company Hawthorne, has filed a lawsuit against Jason Wild and Terracin, saying they ruined its $175 million investment. Hawthorne is complaining that Wild fought the deal because he wanted his own New York license, and Wild is saying Riv Capital is just overpaying for Attain. And in a break from a national trend, a federal judge in Washington state upheld the state's residency requirement for cannabis business ownership and ruled that the U.S. Constitution's Dormant Commerce Clause doesn't apply because cannabis is still federally illegal. Now, this is different from most states' cases where the states have lost this claim. So having these two in conflict sets up a showdown over interstate commerce and cannabis that is likely to move to a higher court. And this has been your business update from the Green Market Report.
Doom and gloom continues in the cannabis industry, and MedMen, that was once valued at over $1.7 billion, now has just $15.6 million in cash reserves, threatening their operation. Just another example of how the cannabis bubble has burst due to excessive debt, market contraction, higher taxes, lower prices, and the power of the legacy market. As you might expect, some of these publicly traded stocks are taking a hit, and not out of a bong. Doug Miller from High on Wall Street has its impact on the stock exchange.
Hello, everyone. I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's cannabis stock report for Weed Talk News. MedMen, stock ticker MMEN. When they first came out, they had commercials everywhere, but they've been burning through some cash. They're actually defaulting on some of their payments. So their stock chart looks like it could curl up real quick off of this news. It's just the way things work, but I'm not chasing it. I expect it to pull back and come back down. The company is for sale. So, hey, if you're interested in a cannabis company, contact them. And that's this week's cannabis stock report. Reporting for Weed Talk News, I'm Doug Miller.
There is a new bill in New York State that would require some health companies to reimburse the cost of their medical cannabis to clients. This story was first reported by Staten Island Live. It was State Senator Diane Savino who announced the bill's necessity for providing opportunities for reimbursement for medical patients from low-income homes. Senator Savino wants to see New York as a leader in this effort and wants her state to force the issue. If approved, the law would apply to public health insurers in the state, including Medicaid, Child Health Plus, EPIC, the Elderly Pharmaceutical Insurance Coverage Group, and essentially plan programs. Meanwhile, in Oregon, state alcohol and cannabis regulators are being replaced after an ethics violation. Our Oregon correspondent, Marianne Kersagi, has the details.
I'm Marianne from Alibi Cannabis with this week's Oregon Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Last week, Oregon's new governor, Tina Kotek, asked for and received the resignation of Steve Marks, the long-term director of the OLCC. It was a surprise across both the alcohol and cannabis sides of the industry. Yesterday, we learned that Steve Marks and other top managers in the OLCC have been implicated in ethics violations relating to reserving popular bottles of alcohol for themselves. Also, this week, the OLCC released their annual report on the state of the cannabis industry. Their report stated that the recreational cannabis industry in Oregon is in its weakest economic position since the legal market launched in 2016. And finally, in happier news, Oregon-based Nectar Markets announced their expansion to Ohio and California. It's great to hear some Oregon-based businesses doing well. That'll do it for the Oregon Report this week. I'm Marianne with Alibi for Weed Talk News.
Michigan continues to set sales records, but there is a story out of the Detroit Free Press that is disturbing. A group that represents one of the largest cannabis companies in the state has made contributions to nonprofits who are linked to Michigan lawmakers. Normal Executive Director of Michigan, Rick Thompson, has more on what is going on in the Michigan cannabis market.
Hello again, everyone. This is the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson on Weed Talk News. Let's begin. The MCMA is dead. We already told you this, but it bears repeating. The end of the Michigan Cannabis Manufacturers Association is a welcome event for those of us who've been fighting big corporate cannabis for a long time. Now, to clarify, it's impossible to remove big corporate cannabis from the American marketplace, but what we can do is penalize those players when they try to illegally influence legislation, lawmakers, or government employees. Much ado has been made about the misdeeds of Rick Johnson, Lee Chatfield, Clint Custo, and other prominent Republicans during the formative years of the MMFLA and the MRTMA business programs here in Michigan. Investigations are still ongoing, but those lawmakers have been implicated in a scheme to shuttle cannabis industry money into nonprofit slush funds or similar accounts, and those funds very often seem to have traveled through the MCMA's hands. Lobbyist Steve Linder retired in disgrace midway through last year after having failed to pass anti-patient and caregiver legislation he swore to accomplish, and the trade association struggled to find relevance and support ever since. Even having former head of the state's marijuana program as their spokesperson couldn't save the trade group. Lansing insiders are abuzz with tales of the MCMA's unpaid bills with public relations and lobbying firms, and there are a number of lawmakers who took MCMA money who are cowering in fear that the federal and state probes will start looking at them now. Almost every major news outlet in the state has written or published an article about the investigations. Patient advocates and caregiver supporters are overjoyed to have buried our swords in the belly of the ogre. Here endeth the lesson. Story for today revolves around aspergillus, the state's cannabis testing industry, and potentially carcinogenic mycotoxins. The state cannabis regulatory agency issued 2 advisory bulletins recently, one establishing a new mycotoxin testing protocol, and another redefining the way aspergillus positive cannabis is to be retested prior to being sold. It seems that aspergillus infestation can also cause the creation of 2 potentially cancer-causing mycotoxins. The CRA wants to be sure that any cannabis which tests positive for the dangerous aspergillus is also tested for those 2 dangerous substances. Although the testing industry should be flexible and responsive to new developments in science, this info about mycos is not new news. The suggested solution for aspergillus infestation is to zap that cannabis with gamma rays, X-rays, the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, or anything else likely to beat the hell out of your cannabis, and then retest it. Facts are, no remediation method kills 100% of aspergillus, and if it tested positive once, it's positive forever. The CRA should eliminate these 2 consumer unfriendly policies, one which allows aspergillus positive cannabis to be sold, and the other that allows zapping or ozoning of cannabis intended for human consumption. Either label it or throw it out, most consumers say. And maybe someday the CRA will start listening to the millions of people who make up the state's cannabis industry and cannabis community. And that's it for the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson on Weed Talk News.
The long Florida legalization effort for legal adult use of cannabis continues. It's been a frustrating road for state advocacy groups like Regulate Florida, where efforts have been tried and then rejected over the past few years. It is certainly not for lack of trying, but the Smart and Safe Florida initiative did get a boost for multi-state operator TrueLeave that holds a majority share of dispensaries in the Sunshine State. That MSO donated $20 million to the ballot initiative. Now it's up to Florida Supreme Court in judicial review. So even if the judges give it the green light, advocates will still have to collect more signatures in order to get it on the ballot in 2024. It's been a long road in Florida, but in Vermont, they are just cruising along now with $6 million in sales in the year 2022. Well, California collects that in just a weekend. But our Vermont report is supported by Canatrol, and our correspondent is Jessie Lynn Dolan.
I'm Jessie Lynn Dolan from Vermont Cannabis Nurses, and this is the Weed Talk News Vermont Report. The Vermont Cannabis Control Board issued a first ever consumer protection warning and pulled all cannabis products from the Holland Cannabis Company off of retail shelves. After a consumer reported being ill post-consumption, the state tested Holland products and found high levels of the banned fungicide myclobutanol, or Eagle 20. Consumers who currently have Holland Cannabis Company products are asked to return them to the dispensary they were purchased as soon as possible. 2 bills were introduced in legislative session this past week from Senator Sears. One bill is simple yet potent, calling to drop the strict THC caps. The other bill looks to address numerous issues, from medical program reforms to increasing allowable milligrams per edible packages and creating a nursery license for adult use, as well as asking for funding to hire more employees for the Cannabis Control Board. Vermont Growers Association hosted a community discussion with local licensed cultivators on February 9th to connect, share experiences and challenges from the market's average price per pound to compliance and product registration. That's the Vermont Report for Weed Talk News. I'm Vermont's cannabis nurse, Jessie Lynn Dolan.
The Vermont Cannabis Report is supported by another Green Mountain business, Canatrol, winner of High Times Best Dry Cure System. Check them out at canatrols.com.
In Europe, it looks like Cannabis Standard Time is happening in Germany, where their legalization plans have continued to be delayed. Our European reporter is Lex Pelger, and he turns 40 this week. Happy birthday to Lex. Well, here's the latest from Europe.
I'm Lex Pelger from White Whale Creations with this week's European Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. In Germany, the plans to legalize cannabis consumption in 2024 are looking increasingly unlikely because it has not yet submitted its proposals to the European Commission. 8 ministries are currently working on the draft law and hope to present it by March. The health ministry has already been fined with a €1 million reduction in their budget over the delays. Like Luxembourg, who announced a goal to legalize 3 years ago, Germany's cannabis plans may be derailed by EU bureaucrats who prefer the status quo. In Switzerland, Basel began its adult-use cannabis trial. 9 pharmacies can now sell cannabis to 180 people who have a cannabis ID card. In 6 months, 200 more cannabis users will join them so they can do a compare and contrast study of the health effects on the participants. The study is scheduled to last 2.5 years. Meanwhile, in Malta, the EU leader in legalizing cannabis, they announced the guidelines for their social clubs where cannabis will be sold. Last year, the country decriminalized possession of 7 grams and the cultivation of 4 plants. But this will be the first legal sales. The clubs will be required to cultivate their cannabis out of sight of the public, grow from seeds sourced in the EU, be 250 meters from schools, and have closed-circuit television systems installed. The application fee started around €10,000, money must be put aside for harm reduction initiatives, and the pricing is required to be close to the black market. Critics argue that these onerous costs will benefit a few rich players instead of creating a network of small community organizations. That's the European Cannabis Report for this week. For more on the science side, see my newsletter on Substack, Cannabinoids and the People. I'm Lex Pelger from White Whale Creations reporting for Weed Talk News.
In California, there is movement to usurp federal law for interstate commerce when it comes to cannabis. The Department of Cannabis Control in the Golden State sent an 8-page letter to the office of that state's attorney general that laid out the legal argument for how California could sidestep federal obstacles if state officials decide to greenlight exports of cannabis across state lines. They just need another state to agree to become a trade partner. So you want to know why it always takes time for reform of cannabis at the federal level? Well, legal challenges to residency requirements for licensees was shot down in Maine in a federal court in August of 2022, but in Washington state this week, they were preserved. Matthew Friedlander has more from Washington state.
Hello, everyone. This is Matthew Friedlander coming to you from the owner's office here at Skagit Organics with the Washington State Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. So we've got a little bit of breaking news for you today. Less than 24 hours ago, a U.S. district judge upheld the residency requirement for cannabis business ownership here in Washington. So you have to be a resident of Washington State, live here for a certain amount of time before you're allowed to have ownership in a cannabis business here. This comes in contrast to a ruling out of Maine, previous ruling by a federal judge that struck down these requirements as unconstitutional. So to address that, here in Washington, there currently is some legislation moving through that would loosen the restrictions around residency requirements. So we'll see how that all plays out over the next month or two. Some other interesting legislation coming up. There is a bill that would create a cannabis commission for research and education around cannabis. And there have been two high potency bills brought recently. One would put a 60% tax on anything over 35%, and the other one just outright bans all products 35% or higher in THC. Let that sink in for a bit. Not great legislation. Anyways, that's some of the things that are going on here in Washington. My name is Matthew with the Washington State Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News.
We've got two stories from here in the Bay State of Massachusetts. One is a milestone in sales, and the other is a bill filed to help right a wrong for the medical market. PCM founder Jimmy Young has those stories for us today, brought to you by Holyoke Cannabis.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jimmy Young with this week's Massachusetts Cannabis Report, brought to you by Holyoke Cannabis. You know, there's been a lot of weed sold in the Bay State in 2022, and even more between 2018 and now. Get out your calculators, because despite the decline in price, the state has now passed the $5 billion threshold in sales since adult use of cannabis started in 2018. Now, year-over-year growth from 21 to 22 was only 7%, much less than the 69% from 2020 to 21. In total, $1.7 billion in sales was another record for 1 year, with adult use at $1.4 billion and only $271 million in medical sales. Now, there was a decline of 41% in prices for flower, and the average price for an ounce dropped from $365 an ounce to $216. Those figures courtesy of the state's Cannabis Control Commission. Needless to say, it's tougher to be in business if your dispensary is just a medical one. Now, when the medical program began in 2013, the Department of Health, which was in charge of the program at that time, required licensees to be vertically integrated. That means they had to grow their own in order to protect the medicinal product. Now, with adult use dominating the market, Representative David Rogers has introduced legislation to get rid of that vertical requirement. In a Boston Globe editorial this week, they believe that the rule no longer has any compelling public safety reason to exist. Instead, it limits competition, which can impact access for medical patients. As a medical patient, I appreciate the representative's effort to change as the market has changed. That's the Massachusetts Cannabis Report, brought to you by Holyoke Cannabis. I'm Jimmy Young reporting for Weed Talk News. Bay State Cannabis Report is supported by Holyoke Cannabis, Holyoke's finest cannabis recreational experience.
Elon Musk has always been in the news for reasons that sometimes he might regret. But in the cannabis community, he is a hero of sorts. Not only did Elon fire up on the Seth Rogen show a year ago, but now that he owns Twitter, he really shook up the Twitter universe. This week, he made a simple tweet. Perhaps you saw it. 420. That's right. 420. magical code for cannabis enthusiasts that has its origins in California from the 70s with a group of high schoolers who used that code to signal their friends it was time to fire up after school and meet at the Louis Pasteur statue across from San Rafael High School. And now Musk's simple post has been seen by millions, and it has now been seen and retweeted by 51.3 million people as of Wednesday this week. Not sure what impact it may have on reform, but Elon Musk certainly knows how to get attention. Okay, that's it for Weed Talk News this week. I'm Alaina Pinto for Pro Cannabis Media. Remember, it is a whole new world of weed out there, so use it responsibly.
It's a whole new world of weed out there, isn't it? Everyone is learning new ways to titrate, ingest, consume, imbibe, and engage with this plant medicine we call cannabis. Hi, I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media and the host of In the Weeds, and once in a while, the really live business cannabis talk show we call Green Rush on Friday afternoons from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern. Now let me tell you my cannabis story. You know, I've had 4 major surgeries in the past 23 years and suffer from osteoarthritis with a variety of metal parts in my body and one on deck. Now, thanks to those chronic pain issues, I've been a medical patient in Massachusetts for almost 10 years now. I remember my first trip to a dispensary just outside of Boston, and I told the bud tender I didn't want to smoke it anymore, so I tried edibles, then tinctures, then vaping, and now, if I'm going to smoke, I only use the Weedgets filtration system. What? The Weedgets.com, Weedgets, that's weed, W-E-E-D, G-E-T-S.com, is where you'll find the planet's coolest product that cools the smoke from everyone's favorite flower. Now, the guy that started this was a pretty good medical device manufacturer, and he created this maze pipe that cools the smoking process from 1300 degrees Fahrenheit upon inflammation down to just 90 degrees when it reaches your mouth. That's right, 1300 down to 90. That's why this maze pipe is amazing. So here's how it works. You start with that glass bowl, you flame on, and then you inhale nice and smooth so the smoke goes through 3 different filtration and cooling systems. Now, if pre-rolls is your thing, you can use the Weedgets filter that a pre-roll fits into perfectly. That's right, or even a chillum. The more filters, the smoother the draw. Best of all is the price. You can get all this, or one or the other, for just a few bucks. It'll cool your smoke and you'll give your lungs a break. Now, add in the code of PCMTV and you get 15% off. So just go to Weedgets.com and check out the best way to enjoy a cooler smoke with less coughing and hacking and more peace of mind. All that resin and tar is collected in the polyurethane filters that are easy to clean with soap, water, and a few Q-tips. Your lungs will thank you, and so will I.
Which at first I thought, oh, I don't know if I'm an activist, but I have, held a bullhorn on the State House steps. I have frequently testified before the Cannabis Control Commission and the state legislature, and I'm not, shy about criticizing where I see, mistakes being made. So yeah, I think that's what differentiates me, just an appreciation for the plant. And then also I'm a cannabis entrepreneur myself. I've started businesses, so I've lived that entrepreneurial journey. I know how hard it is. It is absolutely a marathon, not a sprint. So I think that, I'm in the game, not just on the sidelines.
As a broker, we have access to many, many cannabis carriers. So I will go in with 2 or 3 quotes for people. The quotes might be $20,000 for one, $22,000 for another, $17,500 for another. Pretty close among the three. What I tell people is it's not the pricing, it's what's included and not included, meaning exclusions. An exclusion in layman's terms is just something that's not included. It's not on the menu. So it's just not included. But if you don't know that, if no one shows you that on page 71 of a 150-page policy, you're not going to know. No one knows. I never met one person that says they read an insurance policy. If you do, I got some property in Florida for you.
Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
So the reality of the matter is, big banks and small banks are going to be different in a lot of ways. And they're both going to have their advantages and disadvantages. For a business like cannabis, you really have to have an integral knowledge of that business and a real granular knowledge of that business and the players involved in it. And that's why if you look at the banks that are successful to play in this space in Massachusetts, they are smaller banks that are very heavy, intensified personal touch, human communication, where you don't get a lot of that with the bigger banks.